Hello and welcome to the 5th tutorial of Java Games Programming. I'm your host Zan from Zan's Gaming, and in this tutorial we'll be going over classes and methods. So, let's get started. So before we get started, I would just like to clarify here that I have switched to Eclipse from Notepad++ because we'll be going into a bit more complicated things, and normally I do use Eclipse for my programming. So with that aside, classes in Java represents blueprints for objects. For example, we can have a class for a person which has properties such as a name and an age and a certain actions it can do. Now the properties are specified by the instance variables and the actions it can do are specified by methods. Now we actually have our class person. We can set its properties. We can do a name of type string. We can do an int age. Now what can we do with this name and age properties? Let's say we can set them and we can return it from the user. What does that mean is we can assign a value to the name, and the way we do this is we create a method, public void, meaning that it has no return type, and now we can give the method a name, call it set name. Now this method needs an argument because it needs some value to assign to the variable. The argument is going to be of type string, and we're just going to call it a new name. And now we're going to assign name equals new name. We can also request the person's name from them, so that would be another method, public. Now we use the word string here because this method actually has a return value, and this return value is of type string. Once again, we give the method a name. In this case, we call it getName. Now this method does not need any arguments, so our parentheses are empty here. Start off with curly braces. We use the keyword return and the return value, which is name itself. Now we can repeat the similar behavior using the age instance variable. We can do public void set age. Now this is not a string value. Here we have an int value, so int new age equals new age. Now we can also request the person's age, public int get age, no arguments again, and to use return the instance variable age. In order to use the classes we have created, we can create an instance of them. So for example, we can create a person, give it a variable name, so p1 equals new person. Now Java will create a new person object in memory here. And now we can call the methods that we had created for this person. So we can do p1.setName. We can give this person a name, say Alice. p1.setAge, let's just say 21. And we can actually now print off these values to see if this person is behaving properly. We can do system.out.println. We can do p1.getName to get their name, and then we can do get age to get their age. Now if we run this, we can see the output value right here. So once we get the name, we get the name Alice. Once we get the age, we get the age 21. But it would be not the best thing if we could only instantiate a single instance of this, but it's actually helpful because we can instantiate multiple instances of a person. We can create another person, p2, a new person. Yeah, there we go. And we can assign their own values. So p2.setName, give this person a name Bob, and p2.setAge, give this person an age, let's say 23. Now if we were to print out this person's value, so I'm just going to copy these two lines here, play them again, but instead of p1 I'm going to call p2 here. And just so we can be clear, I'm going to put in some extra messages. person 1 here, and we have person 2 here. If we play this, we have person 1 as Alice at 21, which we had before, and we also have person 2, Bob, at 23. So now we can see how you can instantiate multiple instances of a single class, and this is why it was called a blueprint, because you can now have multiple instances of a single class. We can also use methods to prevent ourselves from rewriting the same code over and over again. If you recall from our Tic-Tac-Toe game, we were repeating the code of printing the grid in 2 different places. So we have the print the grid where the game starts, and we're printing the grid again when the game loop starts. So when the game is actually playing, after every turn we print the grid. We can abstract this away into a method. So we can create a new method down here. Public static void or print grid. Now it's going to need the grid that it needs to print. And we can just copy that code from up there, down here. Now instead of having the code up here, we can essentially just make a call to that method. Print grid. We do have an error here. Let's see what that is. Okay. So this is not supposed to be an int type grid. This is a string grid, because the grid we're using in this, let's see where to go, right here, is of type string. It's a 2D array of type string, not int. And we can replace the grid here as well. Now what's going to happen is when it gets to either of these lines of code that we just changed, it's going to call this method down here. And it's going to do its thing, which is print the grid, and then it's going to just, the method is going to continue. Now a difference here with this method and the one we've seen before is the keyword static. And this is because this is a class method, meaning it's not specific to an instance of it, of the object. Taking a look up here in our main, we do not instantiate a tic-tac-toe object, but instead we are working with the class method main, which is the method which gets executed when you run the program. So to see the example, we have our initial grid being printed. X is going to enter a location, let's say 6, and it updates the grid as before, and now we have X in a new place and the grid is being printed as before. O's turn, 4, and similarly we see this again. Let's just play this real fast. And here we have our use of another method that we can use to simplify the game, because instead of having our long code, we can just simply abstract away this detail. All it does is print the grid without necessarily having to know what it's doing internally. We can also use methods to abstract away some of the details. So from our tic-tac-toe code, if you recall, we had this big long if-else-if statement which checks for the end condition. We can actually abstract this away into a different method so that when we see our main methods, we don't have to take a look at these exact details as to what's going on. We can just assume something else is taking care of it. And the way we do this is, I'm just going to copy this here because we're going to need it, the code as is. We're going to create a new method. So it's going to be public static, and this one is going to be Boolean because it's going to tell if we have finished or not. Call it check end condition, and it's going to need the grid, and it's going to also need the turn counter. Now for the method body, we can copy what we had above and then change things around to actually make it into the method. So instead of saying finished equals true, we just do return true. And instead of being called turn counter, we just called it counter. So if either of these conditions is met, return true. Otherwise, or else, return false, meaning we have not finished yet. Now, instead of having this whole code up here, we can get rid of it. Then we can say finished equals check end condition. We pass it the grid and the turn counter. Let's try the game again. And our end conditions work similarly as before. An important thing to keep in mind is our methods should do one thing and one thing only. So in our case here, a method is checking an end condition. So we can describe this in a single sentence. In our method here, it is printing the grid. In the person example we had, our method is either returning the name or assigning the name a value. Same thing with the age one, either assigning the age a value or returning an age. So it's doing a single task. That's an important thing to keep in mind when you're creating methods. And you can see how we can use sub-methods, or meaning additional methods, to take away some of the details. So we have broken our task into smaller tasks, and now each smaller task has its own method. So this was our short tutorial on classes and methods. Obviously, you can do a lot more than what we just did once you get comfortable with these topics. In the next tutorial, we'll be actually getting started with our game of snakes and ladders, and we'll be using a lot of classes and methods for that game. If you guys have requests for certain topics you would like me to cover, please leave a comment below. If you did enjoy this video, please do leave a thumbs up and a subscribe. So, see you next time.